Thank you for being here. And I suppose I should start by telling you that as John and I thought about this presentation, we realized a couple of things. This is not going to be your normal management presentation. That I can promise you. I suppose for the record, since we're being recorded here, I should give you a more formal title for the presentation. So I was just writing it down, and I think something along the lines of creating a unified culture across disparate organizations would be a much more formal title than There's No Crying in Management. But a couple of more disclosures for you. This really is a true story. The reality of it is John and I lived it along with our team over the last 18 months or so. And what we want to do is be a little bit more conversational in this presentation because we want you to feel it evolve the way it evolved for us. So forgive us if we're a little less formal than some of our other presenters have been, but we hope you take away a few pearls from our presentation. So that being said, I want to start by letting you know I'm not your normal CEO either, and you'll learn this by the way of the presentation. About 18 months ago, I had what I would say one of the most horrible senior team meetings I've had in a long, long time. And the reality of it was I had a senior team at Bridgton Hospital that was not accomplishing goals, was not holding themselves accountable, and quite honestly, I was growing increasingly frustrated with their ability to drive the organization forward for some very basic goals that we had before us. So I went into a management meeting on a Friday morning, basically scrubbed the agenda, and we spent almost an hour talking about accountability. And it was a hard conversation. It was a conversation, quite honestly, that brought a lot of tears in the room. We were predominantly, like most folks in healthcare, predominantly female, but the reality of it was some of the men and some of the ladies shed some tears. So much so that John, our VP of Operations, had to leave the room and get a box of Kleenex because it was a pretty hard session. And I'll freely admit to you, I needed to insulate myself from showing my own emotion and showing my own concern and, quite honestly, my own doubt in this team and its ability to drive things forward. So thinking quickly on my feet, I pulled up the following video just so that I could get a break in the moment.
Are you crying?
No.
Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball.
So the reality of it is what I did worked. It broke the ice for a moment. It brought us back to a little bit more calm situation in the senior team meeting. And it also did two things for me in my mind. The first thing it told me was we needed a different culture in our leadership team. Not being accountable is one thing. Not being accountable and being extremely emotional over it is another thing. And from a cultural standpoint, I committed at that point that we were going to need to press our organization forward to a different style from a leadership standpoint and therefore a different culture. The other thing that only revealed itself when we actually submitted for this presentation is this little video clip gave us the title of the presentation. So we're happy to be here with that. Let me quickly run through a couple of slides. I need to give you some background on the organization. Central Maine Healthcare is aptly named. We are based in Central Maine. Lewiston, Maine is our headquarters. There are 3 facilities that we represent. My 2 hospitals, Bridgton and Rumford hospitals, are the smaller of the 3 facilities, 25-bed critical access hospitals. Our mothership, if you will, is a 250-bed tertiary hospital located in Lewiston, Maine. If I go a little further for you, I would share with you that Rumford and Bridgton Hospital and our corporate offices total 3,500 employees, about $500 million in revenues, and from a just Rumford and Bridgton standpoint, that we comprise about 150 million of that 500 million and about 725 of the employees. We have 350 providers located in 19 different communities throughout Maine. That's 82 different practice sites, actually. Those 350 providers are across all specialties. We really have 3 primary drivers from a strategic standpoint. You can read them there on the screen. I won't belabor them. You probably have them in your own organizations as well if you're from the hospital arena, focusing on culture and service, focusing on operational high reliability, particularly as it relates to quality, and capturing volume to meet community needs as well as support our bottom line. You can see on the map, well, kind of see on the map, 3 push pins. Those are our 3 owned facilities in Central Maine Healthcare. The one to the far north is Rumford Hospital. The one to the west, almost to New Hampshire state line, is Bridgton Hospital, with our tertiary hospital, Central Maine Medical Center, located to the east. In all deference to my friends from northern Maine, if you go much further than Rumford, you'll find more moose than you will people. Our service area is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400,000 people, and it really goes from the coast over to New Hampshire. But at this point, I am far ahead of myself. You've got the background, you've got why we're here. I'm going to sit down with John here, and I need to turn it over to John and let him give you the context for how we got to where we got to.
Thank you, David. After having been at Bridgton Hospital for 9 years, the tenured CEO retired, and David was hired. He found a solidly functioning organization that was largely due to a solid culture with the following attributes. We consistently had a good operating margin, around 10% most of the time. We had high employee engagement and Prescanny scores that were consistently in the 99th percentile, and they had been for about 6 years or so. We had excellent quality outcomes, and probably surprisingly to some of you, we actually had a waiting list for nursing employment. Because of years of success, the team really fell upon their laurels. They were resting on their laurels, which is a problem that'll play out as the rest of the story is unveiled. A year after David arrived, the second CEO of our other hospital, Rumford Hospital, retired. And David was asked to assume the responsibility of that facility too. He quickly found that there were many differences between the two organizations, even though there were similarities. And the differences were a fluctuating bottom line, fair satisfaction scores, employees that were truly not engaged, and they weren't not engaged in their own facility, they were more not engaged in the corporate aspects of what was going on in the company. They had fair quality outcomes and nursing recruitment issues.
I think one other thing, John, that we need to point out to the group is that as I took on the second facility, they also had a CEO that was going crazy, simply because we had two very distinct cultures. These two organizations, while on paper, are very similar. If you looked at them from 10,000 feet, they're even designed very similarly. But the reality of it is different culture, different management style, different focus, even a different personality as you walked into the organization. Either organization. I found myself really with a split personality. Now, for those of you who may know me, that's a short trip. But I would find myself leaving in the morning, turn right out of my driveway, heading towards Rumford, and I'd go Rumford hat, Rumford culture, Rumford style, Rumford management team. Going left, heading towards Bridgton out of my driveway, different hat, different culture, different style, different personality. And it truly was driving me crazy.
It was, truthfully. Despite all the good that was occurring at Bridgton Hospital and the fluctuating success that was occurring at Rumford, things truly started to deteriorate. And the two management teams started to display some of the following key aspects. Because of a long history of micromanagement, the teams started to abdicate their decision-making. They became uncommitted to results and truly were not driven by metrics. They became disengaged. And when asked why they weren't making the changes that were necessary in order to improve, they said, you know, we've always done it that way, and why would we change? This led to a host of issues, not to the least of which were a shortfall in our bottom line of about $500,000, provider turnover in some of the key areas at Bridgton Hospital, and we had surgical coverage issues because there was an issue at the corporate hospital that also needed support, and so we felt it was important to support them. At this point, truly, I was fearful that David was going to propose a radical change in leadership. Instead, we talked about what we needed to do, and we needed the teams to focus on the following issues. We knew we needed to cut expenses. We also needed to target revenue growth, specifically in our surgical department, in our outpatient oncology department, and in a swing bed program at Bridgton Hospital, which had been failing for some time. We needed to retain and enhance our tertiary relationship with the mothership, create standard management approach, and create a culture of accountability at the lowest point of control in the organization.
So as John outlines those things that we knew that we needed to do, I also began to contemplate what I needed from my leadership team as we went forward. And truthfully, it needed to start with redefining our culture to refocus itself in a true north fashion. We refer to true north as being the patient at the center of everything we do. I also needed to build capacity in those senior leaders so they could take on more strategic level items so that they could begin to take more broad brush and high-level viewpoint of the organization rather than being in the weeds all the time. We needed to strengthen, or for that matter, re-strengthen community and cross-organizational relationships or partnerships. While still a part of the system, the truth of the matter is the varying cultures in the two smaller facilities was disparate to the corporation, and we needed to be sensitive to that. I knew that as a function of moving forward, we would have to transition some key managers. It's just a reality of where we were at. We had good but not great employee engagement, and we knew we needed to maintain that, even though we were going to go through some pretty significant change. And finally, as John mentioned, we were having some financial problems, so we needed to stabilize the financial picture as well.
So at this point, for some of you that may know David in the audience, he had a history as a turnaround guy, and we knew at that point that really we didn't want to just go into this reducing expenses. Instead, we really wanted to develop a team that was accountable, that challenged each other and supported each other through difficult times and good. And we knew we wanted to have a self-directed team. So one afternoon, I was sitting in my office, and David came in and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Let's take a ride." And I said, "A ride to where?" And he said, "Just come on with me. We've got some decisions to make, and let's do it over a beer." So off we went in his car, and we arrived at our favorite tavern. He pulled out a pen and some napkins. And truly, the future started to unfold. Many iterations, and truly napkins later, one team to run both the hospitals started to evolve. We knew with my tenure at the hospital, being there at 9 years at the time, that there was really opportunity for me to take on more responsibility. I had been at the time the VP of Administration, as well as the nurse exec for just Bridgton Hospital. And we also knew that if I was going to step away from the nursing responsibility of the facility that I was responsible for, that we had to identify 2 new nursing leaders, which we did at that point, and drew them into the process so they could be committed to what we were going to do in the future and champion the cause with the rest of the institution. We also, at that point, as we got the organizational chart kind of outlined, we knew we needed to include the CEO of the entire corporation, and ran our plan by him, which he gladly approved. Because it was important to us, in order to be successful, to really be married to the corporate initiatives at hand. As David had said a few minutes ago, True North is our patient. Everything we do, we're focused around the patient. We knew we needed to have exceptional accountability. We needed to be metric-focused and once and for all, truly strategically driven. And we use a model of operations that's called CMOS, which is Central Maine Operating System, which uses lean principles, which most of you are probably familiar with. We also use standard work for our managers, which decreases variation. We use employee huddles to continue to keep the communication lines open at every shift around the clock. We use visibility walls to be able to promote and talk about where we are in our strategies, how we're accomplishing them, and drive that down into the organization so that the people that are doing the work are making the change for the future. And we also use A3 thinking, which I'll be glad to talk about if somebody has a question about that after the session.
John, I think we've got a couple of minutes here, and let me interject just a couple of thoughts in and around it all started with a napkin. It is absolutely true. It started around a napkin, and before anybody has concern, yes, there were multiple napkins, not because of multiple beers, just we had to go through several iterations of this. And we really struggled to get the right structure. And the reality of it is, we went back to the basics and reminded ourselves that form truly follows function. So we actually stripped away the names of folks that were on our org charts in the respective hospitals, and we truly created a structure that would accomplish the things that you saw outlined by John earlier. Then we started to figure out who needs to be in those boxes. Seems rather obvious now. At the time, we really labored with it because we had a long-standing tenured management team, and we knew we had some hard decisions to make. But once we broke through that thinking, it made it a lot easier to do what we did.
It did. So how do we identify those leaders that needed to go into those boxes? Firstly, we used the 9-block assessment tool, which many of you may know as the 9-box assessment tool. It allowed us to identify past performance and evaluate future potential. When we did that, the stars really stood out surprisingly. And with those stars, we used the caliper profile to assess and compare the talent of that team and put together an effective team. Next, we put together the organizational chart with all those names in it. And surprisingly, there were 4 people from each of the 2 institutions, and there was no intent to do so. And then I, of course, sit at that senior table as well. We utilize bi-weekly structured senior management teams to look at where we are on a weekly basis with our goals, and also develop plans if we're not where we need to be from a strategic standpoint. We also knew that because we brought 2 teams together that really had never worked together, that we really needed to do some team building. And so we started out with a 2-day retreat at David's house and really looked to the future and set expectations that we were going to uphold because we knew we needed to do so in order to be successful. Besides that, we played some games, and we actually, if some of you may know Minute to Win It on TV, we utilized some of the games from that TV show and allowed the team really to work as a team to be able to create some outcomes.
You'd be amazed what you could do with an empty pizza box and some hard-boiled eggs.
6 months into the process, the consolidated team found their outcomes starting to fail again. And so the president of the medical staff made a recommendation that we read the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It allowed us really to realize that we didn't trust each other. The 2 teams at this point were very different. And so we learned to gain some trust and challenge each other in hard times and good. And that really allowed us to solidify that we were one team driving process for one reason. We also identified key strengths and weaknesses, and the positive outcomes of the other institutions were transferred to the respective one. And then truthfully, we prayed for some luck.
So I get the joy as the CEO to present the results. Even though I had very little to do with these results, I get the chance to brag about them. And being sensitive to the fact of the city I'm in, and not being so gratuitous as to put a Boston Red Sox logo up there, yeah, I know. I want to present to you a baseball-themed set of results. So I'm going to give you our starting lineup here. It starts at the center with team-based goals. Now, each of our senior leaders, because of our smallness and relatively flat management structure, have their departmental responsibility and individual goals. But if you remember the 3 strategic goals that I presented at the beginning of this, our senior team is all in. There's no one person responsible for service. We're all responsible for it, and you would expect a senior team to help then support, encourage, and hold one another accountable to accomplish something like that. I'm going to put a few of them up here just so I can keep running, be sensitive to time. We have improved patient satisfaction. We've seen the numbers over this roughly 18-month journey. Our patient satisfaction is now almost to the 90th percentile at Bridgton, and we're running about 85th percentile at Rumford, at least last we checked, and we check actually on about a weekly basis. So fairly real-time numbers for you. We have reduced variation across both facilities, and it seems simple, but one of my mantras through the entire time that I've been responsible for both organizations was to do the following. Find the best in either place and replicate it in the other one. You're going, great, you're a genius, Dave. But the reality is that's harder done than said. But we've been able to do that. As we consolidated the senior leadership team, it's much easier to transpose those successes from one institution to the other. Alongside of that, as John mentioned, we brought the 2 nursing leaders at the hospitals into this early. We're very consistent from a nurse staffing standpoint, policy standpoint. All the things you would expect from a nursing standpoint has been replicated across the 2 organizations. We have an engaged medical staff. Many of you in this room, if you run hospitals, you would say, my medical staff's engaged. If you haven't figured out anything yet, we are a metrically different organization, so I'll give you one number. We have 95% attendance of our medical staff at every medical staff meeting. They're truly all in as well. We have a managed facility. Parkview Adventist Medical Center is a managed facility located in Brunswick, Maine for us. And recently, John and I were asked by the system CEO to go to Parkview and help replicate some of what we had done at Bridgton and Rumford. I'm proud to tell you we were able to create similar staffing patterns in most every department. We took out about 7% of the operating budget, or about $3.5 million on an annualized basis. More importantly, we were able to create a flatter management structure there, very similar to what we've done at Bridgton and Rumford, and the results have been pretty impressive early on. We started that journey back in about May. Swing bed. basically post-surgical or skilled level patients that still need hospital care. We had a very strong program in Rumford. We had a fledgling or if non-existent program at Bridgton. We asked the leader of the Rumford program to come down to Bridgton and basically do it all over again. She's also our director for therapy services in both facilities. So we've seen $1 million annualized net impact on our revenues at Bridgton for the swing bed program itself, and a 40% increase in our therapy services related to those swing bed patients. When we realized that we were going to reduce our management team, basically taking 2 teams and making it into one, we did have some attrition. We let some folks go. It took about $400,000 of expense out of the organization. To give you some context, that was about 18% of our total management costs of the 2 organizations came out as we consolidated this team. And then because we're now consistently reporting from a performance improvement and quality standpoint and consistently reporting as it relates to some of our payers for at-risk or pay for performance, we've been able to retain or protect roughly $600,000 in revenues on an annual basis because we're now consistently doing things from a quality and performance improvement standpoint. There is no question about it. That's a pretty strong starting lineup. What I am most proud of is we've got a good bench too. The reality of it is a few more results for you. On a case mix index adjusted cost per discharge, Bridgton and Rumford hospitals are the 2 lowest cost facilities in the state of Maine. The reality of it is there's a significant gap before you get to the 3rd hospital as well. iVantage, which is a national reporting organization, annually looks at all 1,358 critical access hospitals around the country. For 2 years, Bridgton Hospital has been in the top 100. Last year, I believe we were number 14. Is that right, John?
That's right.
Don't worry, I've already asked him how we're going to get to number 1 by next year, so the pressure is on. On the Rumford side of things, our friends at Leapfrog, Patient Safety and Quality, has named Rumford Hospital last year one of the 12 small or rural facilities, top rural hospitals in the country. Also, through the ANCC, a nursing organization, Rumford Hospital has achieved its Pathway to Excellence designation. About 5 to 7% of the hospitals around the country have that designation. Oop, I went too far. Right now, our success is feeding on itself. There's no question about it. The flywheel has caught, and we're starting to see a lot of change. And it's not driven by the results. It's driven by the culture. As John said, it started with trust. It will continue with trust. And the team now really has a philosophy. There's no more crying in management. We proceed until we're apprehended. With that, there's no question about it. We at Bridgton and Rumford Hospitals continue to make errors. And I continue to have tremors like that when things get repeated from an error standpoint. But there is no question about it. With our culture, from a leadership standpoint, being focused on accountability, trust, and those things that go with it, we have an environment of encouragement and support when we do make those mistakes. It's an incredible organization to be a part of. I am truly thankful that John and I were here to present this to you. We enjoy our story. We hope you do it as well, and we'd be more than happy to answer some questions. We've got about 2.5 minutes left.